Welcome to this episode of Sunny Silver Linings. Sunny's guest this week is Jill Chapman from Insperity. Jill is a senior performance consultant with Insperity and has been there since 2012 and specializes in recruiting services. She splits her time between homes in Houston, Texas and Hawaii and is a self-described big talker on her LinkedIn profile. Jill, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you. And as always, your host and my friend, Mr. Sunny Kaila, the founder and CEO of IT by Design. Sunny, take it away.
Thank you, Todd. And Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. Insperity, since we started doing business with Insperity and having our HRIS system to, using Insperity as a backend, we changed as a company, and you have made a huge contribution as an organization to our company, from people practices, from process perspective, systems perspective, and in general, the culture perspective. We always have that, people on our speed dial where we can reach out to them for legal advice, for any kind of HR advice, and it's been a great experience, and thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining.
That's our pleasure. We love hearing stories like that. It's so encouraging to hear those sorts of things, because you as a business owner, you got into business not because you wanted to handle all the ticky-dock, the administrivia, and all that goes along with being a business person. You had a vision, you had an idea, and you wanted to take it to market. And so I think by working with organizations like ours, and us in particular, it gives you that opportunity to stay focused on what your true passion is, what your love is, and what you're trying to do for the marketplace, and offload some of that stuff that would otherwise distract you. So that allows you to run further and faster. So good on you.
That's so true. We can focus on our one thing and get help from the experts.
Right, there you go.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and get into the topic this week. And our topic this week are, what are the new challenges and solutions small businesses have faced when it comes to talent hiring, retaining, and company culture? So let's start, right at the beginning. So talent, prior to the pandemic, talent was very, very tight. Jill, what have you seen as far as, talent availability as a result of changes in different verticals and remote employees?
So talent is still very tight. So I don't want you to be distracted by unemployment numbers. Everything that I read, everything that I've heard on the street, those unemployment numbers look high, historically high, as a matter of fact. But what they don't tell you is a significant number of those people who are drawing the unemployment are on furlough. So they have an option to go back to their original employer, and that is their plan. So they're not actively looking for employment. A couple of other things that we have to speak into is the fact that some of those folks are making some pretty good money being on unemployment, and it has allowed them the opportunity to rethink what it is that they want to do in the future, or if they want to re-enter the workforce. I just read an article yesterday in Forbes that spoke to the fact that we are seeing women at this point leave the workforce, just opt out of the labor force right now. I'm sure that if I tried to connect the dots, I would find that has something to do with perhaps some of the schooling and childcare issues that folks are facing. I don't want to be, paint too broad of a brush, but I would have a feeling that has something to do with it. And then we're also seeing those folks that I'm going to call mature workers, people who look a lot like me, that are saying, you know what, I've done this, I've been through these things before, I'm done. And because this, if you want to call it a recession, I don't know what you want to call the economic situation that we're in as a country, but let's just call it a recession for fun. It's different than the recessions that we've seen in the past. Stock market didn't take as big of a hit in all the areas. Most days when I'm watching, the ticker on the TV, it's green, right? And so people don't have to stay in the in their jobs because there's not that I've got to stay and make back some money. So they have that flexibility. Home prices have stayed up. And so again, for those reasons, it hasn't forced people to stay in the workforce if they were kind of thinking about leaving. And so some folks have packed their bags and are permanently going to be out of the labor market with this pandemic. So those numbers, while they might look high, still there is that war for talent word that we want to use. There is still a struggle to identify the good quality talent that's going to take our organizations to the next level. So it looks like it can be a little misleading. And I think that that's one thing. Now, there are a significant group of people that are in those numbers. We had some industries that were harder hit. And that's another weird thing about this recessionary time. Usually it's the commodities that take the hit, and the services still can do well by providing some service. And it's flipped this time, right? We're all buying the toilet paper and the things, but we're not availing ourselves of extra services out in the marketplace, or travel, hospitality, and some of those things, restaurants and all. So that's been different, and we're seeing kind of a different play in the labor market as well because of it.
And Sunny, over to you. We're continuing to grow our team here at IT by Design. What has your HR teams kind of told you, or what are you seeing from candidate availability, both inside the MSP space and outside the MSP space?
Yeah. So just to add to Jill's points, we do see that unemployment rate is up. At the same time, my experience with especially the vertical that we are in, which is technology. So in the technology world, talent war is still there. If you really look at those numbers that where unemployment is coming from, it's from restaurant workers, and a lot of hospitality-related businesses, or businesses that were impacted due to pandemic. But technology professionals are still in high demand, and you don't see too much unemployment there.
Yeah, right.
And so technically, if you look at talent availability right now, it's actually tighter in the technology sector because economy is strong. And businesses, they're leveraging PPP funds to other things that they have to hire more to build their structures for the next year, especially technology companies. So the way I see it, or when we go out there to look for talent, it's actually harder than before March.
Right. Well, the pandemic brought us all sorts of things as far as the workforce is concerned. And I used to say that it's like, the future of work showed up on March 13th, right? It's all the stuff that we've been talking about for years, but here it was. It hit us right, right where we live. And things like remote working, right? Now we're all working from home, or a vast number of us are working from home. So again, to the technology piece, as Sunny and I have been talking about, it created a new need, or a more robust need, not new, but more robust need in certain sectors of technology. Because everybody's working from home, they needed to be outfitted with the tools and the technologies to be able to accomplish that, right? Then security became an issue. And so you watched all these things happen. And the ideas that we had all talked about being fundamental to our growth in the future, and everything underscored with technology, actually showed up, and we needed to put those things into place. People have had Zoom for eons, right? But nobody used it. I think when we all asked for it in our companies, we're like, oh, it'll cut down on travel. We can do all these business meetings and we don't have to be face to face. Yet we had the Zoom, but we were still face to face. Well, then March 13th, we're all on Zoom, right? So being able to create, I think, the new technologies, and this was a great time for innovation, right? This is a wonderful time for companies to innovate, to rethink. And so again, with the technology piece, that just, gives much more opportunity for those folks. So it is super tight in the IT world
So one thing that I do see, Todd, in terms of positions. So for example, when we have technology positions open, that's where we don't find too many candidates that are out of work, right? But when you look at some other positions that we're filling, so for example, in HR, recruiters, sales, marketing, where those professionals it's easy for them to transition from one vertical to another vertical. And that's where, so when we are interviewing salespeople, marketing people, administrative staff to recruiters, we are okay with hiring someone where they have worked for JW Marriott, for example. If they have done hiring for a hospitality company, they just need to learn what are the skills and competencies required by IT by Design in the technology field, but they can transition easily. So that's where the opportunity is there, where some positions can be filled from other verticals, and those verticals were impacted, and you can probably have that, your kind of part of your recruitment strategy, that where to look for in terms of your sourcing strategies. And one more thing there is that jobs where they could work from home, people that could work from home, and normally six-figure salaries, people, they could transition to work from home. But a lot of people, whether hourly workers or workers where they have to go to work to earn, that's where majority of the unemployment is coming from, because that's where businesses cannot let them work from home. But professional businesses, type of business our MSP partners are in, or we as a master MSP, we're okay with people working from home. And majority of the technology companies are okay with people working from home, and that's where you don't see too much unemployment.
Right, absolutely. And I do think that some employers figured out creative and clever ways that people who traditionally weren't in a work from home program learned how to adapt, right? We started doing things. Who thought that you could do, elementary school online, right? That you needed to be with your teacher to, for you to get to the concepts and all that sort of thing. So I even think some companies got very creative, or some industries got very creative in how they could leverage technology in ways that they hadn't thought about really, or certainly hadn't implemented before the COVID. I think about like telemedicine. Man, that was a concept and people were talking about it. But now everybody's going to the doctor via Zoom, right? So it was really it's been interesting to watch some of those people who you would have thought needed to be face-to-face with the customer to deliver the product or service, and maybe not. Let's think about this a little bit differently. And not even whether they could or they would or they should or they had in the past. We also watched companies who, it wasn't because the job couldn't be done online. It was because they didn't want it to be done online, right? We had managers that thought that the only way that you're effective is if you're actually coming to the office. So we had to kind of retrain a level of managerial staff as well to understand that working from home doesn't mean that you're slacking off all the time, right? And so we had to go through some of those ups and downs as we started to make the adjustment. So
acceptance rate of managers or companies with people working from home, or they letting their people work from home, changed now, because a lot more businesses, a lot more leaders are open for their team members to work from home. Now, did that change for you at Insperity post or during COVID, or it was always where you were able to work from Houston or Hawaii?
So I'm in a fortunate position that probably about a year or so, maybe even two, before we had the pandemic, that I was offered the opportunity to work fully from home with the option to come in whenever I felt like it or whatnot. So I maintained a little desk space at the office, but I largely chose to work from home. And then we had the opportunity to go to Hawaii. And I was like, hey, that work from home thing, do you really care where I'm sitting? Does it matter? If maybe I'm sitting on Maui instead? And they were like, no. And I work very hard to keep this, right? And I understand that I have a precious opportunity here. So I work very hard. And that's why I wake up on Central Time when I'm in Hawaii. So I stay with my coworkers on the Texas timetable, so that I don't want any kind of reason why, this isn't going to work any longer. But I was fortunate in that I was already working from home before the pandemic. So it was just, situation normal for my team. we did have teams at Insperity that weren't working virtually before the pandemic and have moved to that. So we did have some adjustments within our organization. I just wasn't one of them.
Yeah, overall,
Right.
I do see that that businesses, leaders, they are a lot more open. That conditioning that we had as leaders, that this job can only be done from office. I think a lot has changed because of everyone working from home, and I think that acceptance rate definitely went up in terms of businesses letting their team members work from
But
home.
you want to know something kind of interesting that came out of it is, yes, the managers became okay with this idea, but we started to see issues with our managers because it was almost like they fell into two camps. You had the one camp that was always on top of their employees, checking in with them every 15 minutes. What are you doing now? What are you doing now? Because they couldn't see them, so they couldn't validate that they were actually working. We also noticed that with some of our employees, we had to, not necessarily at Insperity, but across the population, that we had to do some bench load leveling. That, when it's a results only type work environment, you see who's working, who's got too much on their plate, who didn't have enough on their plate, and so we noticed that there was maybe some disparity there that we had to correct. But then back to the managers, we had this kind of too much in your business. And then we had the MIA managers, right? The people who probably when we were working in the office, we didn't interact with them that much, but we knew they were down the hall in their room, right? Like we knew we could stop in and check, run something past them if we needed to. Well, then they were always kind of an absentee manager. And now we're working from home. Now we can't find them, right? And now we don't have, so they're MIA. So some managers had to learn some lessons very, very quickly in this transition to make sure that they were doing right by their teams to keep their teams as productive as possible. But overnight, we went to a results-only workforce. So if your organization didn't have metrics in place, didn't have some things that you could manage those workloads and those deliverables of your people, it became a real struggle for some organizations to try to wrap their arms around that.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and let's talk about that a little bit, because we at IT by Design had to work with Insperity to revisit our performance management system. Mm-hmm. Because what used to be like we had dashboards in our bullpen on TV. We have a couple of TV screens in our bullpen, and people, that's where we were displaying our scorecards or KPIs that are important for a business unit. And managers that were working in the bullpen with their teams, they didn't have to do too many things in terms of setting up KPIs for their team members. And now, so we could see some challenges, and we're like, okay, let's revisit our performance management process. And that started with us working with Insperity to review skills, competencies, scorecards, and how we configure goals there, so that the manager, the leader, and the person, their team members are on the same page in terms of success measures. That you don't need to be able to working. I mean, you don't need to be right next to the team member. You can just look at your next 90 days goals, where the quarterly review process that we follow here. That is, we had to make some changes. We had to add, remove some things. Because of the new world that we live in, their leaders and team members, they are both set up for success in terms of objectives and success measures. So what do you see there at Insperity or from your Insperity partners, where you're helping leaders define objectives, goals, and have that performance management system, which is a great system that Insperity gives you as part of the HRIS system? Do you see any lessons learned that you want to share with the viewers?
Shameless plug. I just posted a blog last week on resetting expectations from your staff and revisiting those KPIs in light of the pandemic, because so many of us, had our goals. We had just set our goals at the beginning of the year, and everybody was working towards those things. And a lot of folks have goals that are tied to financials or tied to things that just couldn't happen because of the pandemic. And so in order to keep your employees engaged and moving forward, it's important to revisit those things and make sure that they're in alignment where somebody can feel some sense of success as they move through. So some of those things had to be kind of thrown out the window and new ideas put into play based on where we sat. Again, another plug for Insperity, but Insperity took a look at where we were at the time of the pandemic and went ahead and as an incentive to our employees and as a thank you for making the pivot so quickly and so seamlessly for so many of our customers, they went ahead and gave us part of our bonus based on how we had performed up to the pandemic right there at that time. So at a time where people could use some extra cash, things were, maybe a spouse had been laid off or something like that, it became very valuable to the engagement of our employees. And so some thoughts around that, looking at maybe we don't do a year-end bonus, maybe we dole it out in different ways throughout the course of the year to maintain that engagement. And again, looking at what we're evaluating our employees on. Is it realistic? Does it fit now in this new working model? Or are there some new things that have bubbled up that we do need to take a look at? And so do we need to make some changes around that? I think all employees want feedback. That's just part of who we are. We want to get better. And so the idea of having, like you have a quarterly evaluation period or quarterly feedback for your employees, I think that stuff is so important. And especially when we can't be in the same room together all the time, it's so critical in order to make sure that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction, that we all still feel plugged in, and that culture, stays obvious to all the players within our group. So as much feedback as you can muster is never too much, right? You can't ever give too much feedback, I don't think.
Yeah, that was so. Your action during this type of environment as an organization goes a long way for culture. So I'm so happy to hear that Insperity they were able to give some bonuses in case there's a family that is going through some hard time struggles. Someone in the family don't have work anymore. So those are the things that people are going to remember, because those type of small things, they make you feel part of something bigger.
Just before the pandemic, you guys are familiar with that meeting that they have in Davos, Switzerland, the big companies and the big thinkers, all go to Davos, Switzerland, and it's the genesis of the fourth industrial revolution and all that. Well, just this year, in 2020, those folks attending Davos signed a manifesto, if you will, that says everybody's important to our organization. It's not just the stockholders, but everybody, is valuable to the health and the well-being and the future of an organization. Their customers, their community, their employees, right? And so all these companies signed off on this. Well, talk about having to put your money where your mouth is. Right. Then we come back, from that, it was like in February, right? And then here we are in March, and people are really having to, to put it out there to say, yes, my employees are every bit as important as my customers. And yes, my customers are very much as important as my stockholders. And how people responded during the pandemic, how you treated your employees, what you thought, how you looked at these things, those will become hygiene factors in the future. If I'm looking to hire with a new company, look for that to be a question that comes out of a candidate's, that they're going to ask. What did you do during the pandemic? How did you treat your employees? They're going to want to know that.
Absolutely. That's so critical. Like what you did during tough times. Mm-hmm. And so we started so many new initiatives to add value to our people, because we live that mantra of power of people. Mm-hmm. And the community that we're building at work, the family that we have at work. Okay, what we need to do for our family, and we have never been this much intentional about our culture, our family since March. And Todd is part of our culture team as well. From the culture team initiative to where a lot more helping hands were given to our HR, to do more for our people, because this is when they needed us to be there for them.
Because your people are everything to your organization. You can provide your services, but so can somebody else, right? They can provide competitive services, but the difference between their service and your service, it's your people, right? Yep. And so you can understand that that's the most critical thing you can do for the success of your business is to embrace your people, take care of your people. That's where it all starts. And the success of organizations, when you look at any successful one, usually they have a great culture by design that's taking care of their people. Because what they used to say, take care of your people and they'll take care of your customers. Right?
Yeah. So that's the mantra that we follow, or business philosophy that we have is we have 3 pillars: our people, our internal community, our customers community, and our strategic partners community, people as partners like Insperity, where we start with our people first, that if we make this community is healthy, they're happy, they're going to take care of our customers, our partners community. And if those 2 communities are healthy, strategic partners going to come for that influence, and strategic partners want to be then part of this healthy community, and they will be taken care of as a result of these 2 communities. And that's how we look at business. Very simple formula, 3 pillars. But start with your internal people first, and being intentional there with having the right heart and head to make sure that you start there. There's always room, and you can do more. You can get better. But once you're intentional about taking care of your people, everything else is taken care of.
Also applies. Yeah, absolutely.
So, we've got a great culture here and the teams are growing, but Jill, what's some of the best advice you would share with your Insperity partners and Sunny and I, as far as the virtual interviewing and virtual hiring, and what are some of the legal loopholes that we have to watch for, and our partners should watch for?
Right. So again, when we all went virtual with our work, well, guess what? We also went virtual with our hiring and our interview processes. Now, digital recruiting is really more than just, virtual interviews, right? It starts at the beginning when you begin to use technology to source better, to identify talent better, to screen better, and those sorts of things. And then that kind of pushes you through to interviewing. 2 common ways that people will use technology to do interviewing. That's the taped interview, where you ask somebody, here's 3, 5 questions, whatever, tape it at your convenience, send it in to us, and we'll watch it at our convenience, and then we'll move forward. Or there's the live interview, which really looks a whole lot like what we're doing right here, right? It's just same kind of interview that you would do in the office, but you're doing it on Zoom. I tend to find more people are more comfortable with the live rather than the recorded, but there's pros and cons for both. But I think that this has become a necessary evil because we're all social distancing. We're all, folks aren't wanting necessarily to come back in the office. We have some businesses that are deciding you're not going to come back in the office. This is where we're going to move forward. So we need to embrace this idea. We need to get comfortable with it. And from a legal aspect, I don't know, this idea has been around for a long time. We've not really seen too many things kind of vetted through the court system as it relates to digital interviewing. A couple of things that folks might be concerned with is, if I can see them before I've actually interviewed them, then would I make some biased decisions and that sort of thing? Well, I think if you're that aware, then you most likely probably wouldn't, because that's important to you, and you would want to have as many people in the funnel as possible. When we talk about diversity hiring, we're really talking about putting as many people at the top of the funnel as is absolutely possible, so that we can have more diversity flow out the bottom, right? But there are issues around storage. Everybody's sending in these videotapes, like, where am I going to keep that? A lot of us don't have applicant tracking systems that can warehouse the video, right? They can do the paper for the resumes and some of those sorts of things, but not for the video. So that's a bit of a concern. Usually with the Zoom type, and I just keep saying Zoom, I'm not really advocating for one platform over another, but that's what I'm used to, I guess. I think Zoom's going to become like the new Kleenex, right? But with those, there's really not a need necessarily to capture that and hold on to that interview for life. You can just take your notes like you would if somebody was right across the desk from you, and you can work off your notes, which is just the way that you would have always worked. It does give you an opportunity to perhaps, if there's technical difficulties, kind of see how this person handles themselves under pressure. Might give them an opportunity to kind of look at their environment and pick up some cues that we couldn't have done before. But the con would be, they have no opportunity to see other people in the workplace or see just how business happens at your company. But I think the pros outweigh the cons, and I think that this is going to be a new. It certainly got stickier as we went through the pandemic. People who had thought about it but didn't really put it into play now have embraced it, just like they've embraced the work from home.
Sunny, IT by Design, we've been using, Zoom for interviews and such, but it's usually followed up by an in-person. But with the travel restrictions and the social distancing, how has your leadership team overcome those challenges to, truly get that gut feeling for the candidates before they move them further forward in the hiring process?
Yeah, so a few recent hiring positions that we have filled, we did not meet the candidate in person. Everything was virtual. And I see a bigger opportunity because now we can see more candidates, we can talk to more candidates, it saves a lot of time. We just had to revisit our hiring process steps. And one thing that I want to share, which really, really worked well for us, is majority of these virtual tools or virtual communication tools, they give you these breakout sessions. Zoom provides that as well. So let's say I have 10 candidates that I want to process in one day, and I have 3-4 interviewers. And I can have a breakout room created for every interviewer where I can have a time window for 2 to 3 hours and process a lot of candidates, and then, or even having a kind of tandem interviewer type of the tandem interviewer can be somewhere else, and you can still have multiple people talk to a candidate. So the transportation system that we have today, which is Zoom or Teams, whatever you're using, I don't call it like Zoom. I'm like, this takes me from one place to another now without without buying a ticket. So with the virtual job fairs as well, we have done a few job fairs that were really successful. We had a lot of candidates joined in one day, especially that meet and greet, that orientation that we do, the company info session that we do. We just take that half an hour, who we are as a company, what we believe in, why we do what we do, just having a lot of people learn about IT by Design. And then if the interest is there, then we take them to different breakout sessions, have that one-on-one conversation. So we are able to use virtual job fairs and process a lot more candidates now and a lot more efficient with our recruitment process.
Absolutely. The efficiencies are bar none when we involve the video aspect and being able to do it anytime, anywhere, especially when you're talking about a passive candidate pool. Those people usually have to take time off of their current job, right? So there'd be travel time, there'd be all these extra things that would take a 1-hour interview and make it maybe 2 or 3 hours out of their day. So it's better all around, I think, from that regard. And then, as I always like to say, if you're moving to a virtual only environment at work, do I have to hire the C player that's down the street now? Now I can hire the A player that's across the other side of the country, all right? Because it just widens that talent pool. So
So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because we had a huge success with the one-off position that we never imagined filling that position. It's a recruiter position. So it's a recruiter position here for our U.S. office. And we were able to fill that position with a candidate from Orlando. And we always wanted to have someone, in the tri-state area, especially someone who can travel to the office. And we had limited success in the past. And now, with the talent pool available to us in every major city, we were able to get better caliber at a lower rate. And we were able to the time to fill for this position was so efficient, and I'm just so happy that we were able to do that.
Good.
All right, and then so we've gone ahead and we've cast our talent net wide. We've gone through the virtual interview. We've found that candidate. How has, again, the social distancing and remote employees? What are some of the best practices you recommend your partners and small businesses follow as far as that virtual onboarding versus bringing the person in the office, walking around, having them meet each person, showing them where their desk is? How has the Zoom onboarding per se affected organizations?
So I have to say that when you think about a successful onboarding process, it started way back when you were talking about casting that wide net. It starts with that employment brand and how you're communicating that, how you're articulating what goes on within your organization from a culture perspective, from the expectations of your people. So you're setting that stage all along the way. So when you think about successful onboarding, you got to back all the way up to the beginning of how you're building your infrastructure, because it all leads to that successful onboarding opportunity. And so because they're used to working with you already in this kind of virtual environment as they've moved through the process, it shouldn't be a disconnect when they get to the virtual onboarding. And there are so many now things that you can do just prior to their start, how you disposition or how you provision them for that first day, making sure that you have all their tools and the technologies that they need ready for them, and that you've really welcomed them into the organization, and you can continue to communicate. I do think that it's really important at bringing these folks on that the very first day is a worthwhile day, not a day of can you fill out these 10 forms and do this and do that and turn this in by 5 o'clock, but actually giving them things that they can do, people that they can meet, and providing energy, because most engaged employee you're ever going to have is that person who shows up on day one, right? They're excited about their new opportunity. They're eager to get started. So how disappointing would it be if you're like, oh, well, I'm going to turn you loose now and you can do these 12 forms and, somebody will check in with you at 1 o'clock, So to be able to have things for them to do right away, people for them to meet, and be able to continue those culture conversations for what's important to your organization right from prior to day one, but specifically on day one. And as you move through, setting expectations, setting metrics, and communicating with them, because it's all about communication. It doesn't matter if they've been here for 1 day or 1 year or 100 years. It's that communication that we have with our people that makes us successful.
And Sunny, we've onboarded people traditionally, bringing them in, setting them up, especially in the Knox. How have the teams adapted at IT by Design for setting the employees up to work remotely, and how has that impacted the onboarding process?
Yeah, so pre-boarding, which is before the onboarding, is where we had to work a lot, because that's where you have to ship the computer or anything that's part of your onboarding. The person was supposed to be in the office on the first day, and they could, for example, employee handbook, right, where they had to sign a copy, which was in the office. You give it to them, I-9 and everything else, like a checklist for the documents. So we had to systemize that in terms of, okay, where can we use DocuSign, for example, where they can just sign that, digital signatures are required or signatures are required. We had to just move it from manual to digital. So pre-boarding, so having the person's VPN to everything set up in advance. And that's where we had to work a lot to make sure that we are ready to onboard people virtually. So pre-boarding process, it could be sending a handwritten note or anything that's part of your culture that you used to do on the first day in person. So now how can you do that? In some cases, you have to ship those things or mail those things. We give a gift card for the family, because when a person is going through change, they're going through a lot of emotional, it's very emotional for them. You want to make sure that they feel safe, they feel secure, that the decision that they have made is the right decision, and the company that they're going to Everyone is very welcoming. They are excited about them joining. So you want to do more in terms of giving them the love and respect that they need to be comfortable with your team and your company.
Wow, you get some great HR advice. I don't know where you got that from, but those are all marvelous tools to use to make sure that you can extend your culture to your newest employees.
Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. We truly, truly appreciate your partnership and sharing very, very valuable insights with our viewers. And with so much wisdom there in terms of how do you keep your culture strong? So, for example, performance management process, how revisiting that process and making sure that it's still relevant and relatable to your company, and having the hiring processes, how you can do virtual job fairs to other things, and the onboarding piece. So, thank you so much for sharing your experience with our partners. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Hope everybody got a little takeaway from our time together. So I've enjoyed myself immensely.
All right. Thank you, Sunny. Thank you, Jill. And to you, the viewers, thank you for taking the time to watch this podcast. We hope you took away a couple of nuggets of knowledge. There certainly was an awful lot dropped in this one. It's almost like a masterclass on a virtual culture setting. And we hope you'll drop a like, a share, leave a comment. Tell us what your favorite takeaway was. And we'll see you all in the next episode.